Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age is an amazing remaster that companies should look up to when remastering games, by not only improving visuals in significant ways, but adding more content and making the experience smoother and more fun for players with the extra features. However, a part of its soul is lost with the ability to increase the game's speed. Final Fantasy XII always seems to be forgotten in the franchise due to its release at the end of the PlayStation 2's lifespan and also making significant changes to the franchise's battle system, resembling an MMO even though it has no online features whatsoever. I loved the original version of this game and played it for hours and hours multiple times, so it was quite satisfying to know that the game was getting a remaster and that it got so accessible. Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age was released in all platforms, and it is a great way for more people to get to know the installment, a treatment that a lot of other games deserve. A major change done from the original game is that you now have to choose jobs for your characters. People often complain that the original Final Fantasy XII, which are referred to as vanilla version from now on, had too little restrictions and all of your characters would end up using the same equipment and do pretty much the same things. While I personally love this side of FF12, it did rob the game of diversity. So in Zodiac Age we are introduced to a job system. I know what you're thinking, wow, revolutionary, a job system in an RPG. But it works incredibly well, bringing variety by utilizing the foundation built by the original game. The job system requires you to pick jobs for every character, defining which weapons, equipment, and abilities they can use. After a certain point in the game is reached, somewhat at its beginning, characters will be able to pick a second job, so it's important picking jobs that match up well. Every job gives access to its license board, and that's what will allow you to use different equipment and abilities, even though you have to acquire the equipment and the abilities themselves first before you're actually able to use them. I gotta say, I felt that the job descriptions were too poor and there wasn't that much you could learn from reading them. I also felt that it was required for you to already have some knowledge of the game to be able to make your choices, because even though you can check the license board beforehand, you have to check every single thing in it to have a grasp of what it can do, which is very tedious and draining to do. Like, take a look at this. An empty board is a chore to read. You can't see what each square gives you unless you place a cursor on top of it, and these boards are big. Checking even one board completely is already super boring. So how can you check all 12? But the game makes up for this problem by allowing you to change your job with no penalty to the player. You can only do it by talking to a character at a specific place, but this option is unlocked quite early, giving you the freedom of making mistakes. So you might say the game has a more of a hands-on approach, allowing you to get comfortable with its mechanics and elements, so you can make choices early on with no punishment to your journey. That's especially true in the beginning of the game, where you will have easier fights and your setups don't matter as much, so you won't get stuck because of these choices. Even with my knowledge from the vanilla version, picking jobs was not an easy task that I was comfortable making. One thing that helped a lot was googling about the jobs, especially for the job combinations. Tons of people have discussions on forums about the job picks and combinations, and it really helped me a lot making my decisions. So it's a good idea checking Google before making your choice. Another feature added in Zodiac Age was the ability to speed up the game. The vanilla version could be quite slow, requiring players to spend lots of time killing normal monsters that are no challenge and also traversing wide open areas to reach their destination, which could take a long time and got boring sometimes. This feature fits incredibly well with the game, allowing players to have more fun actually exploring dungeons however they want and focusing on whatever they find most fun, removing the tedious parts of the game. The vanilla version required a ridiculous amount of time to grind when you needed or wanted, and this also hurt doing quests and triggering rare enemies to appear. All of these problems go away when you allow players to speed up the game. Another massive bonus to the game with this feature is to the story, believe it or not. Now's the part you ask me, how does that even work? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, Final Fantasy XII has a very interesting narrative, but in the original game, the story disappeared with its long gameplay sections. After a very story-driven beginning, the world opens up considerably and will ask you to explore lots of wide open areas for the story to progress. In the middle of Final Fantasy XII, you're asked to traverse 4 new different places at once to progress the story. All of these 4 areas are pretty big and have their own challenges to them, so you can imagine the time it would take. So what happened in the vanilla version was that you would end up forgetting about the plot after hours of exploring different places and focusing on gameplay. But by increasing the gameplay speed in Zodiac Age, the story comes into the spotlight and really shines through. You'll have a better appreciation of the plot and the character developments this way, making the experience more cohesive. In contrast to this, I would argue the speed up feature hurts the laid-back atmosphere of the world of Ivalice. Your character's movements have pretty good speed normally, and the feel of walking around the open and different areas of this world was definitely one of its charms. This also worked for walking around towns, especially when these were small and calm villages. It felt weird to run at supersonic speed through these areas, like it didn't really fit the atmosphere. Of course, the good thing about speeding up was that you can turn it on and off at your own will, so players can choose what will make them most satisfied. I found myself using the speed up in dungeons after I had already explored them at my own pace, mostly if I wanted to find a specific monster or something of the like. And I honestly recommend playing it this way, as it keeps the charm of the towns and even the dungeons themselves, so you get a feel of how these places are and not just storm through them. Let's talk about the story for a bit. I won't talk about the ending or major spoilers, but if you absolutely don't want to know anything about it, skip ahead to the next section using the timestamps that are in the description and comments. Contrary to most RPGs out there, Final Fantasy XII isn't about very special people with ultimate powers on a quest to purge evil from the world. The conflicts are all political, with struggles between nations and governments, even inside the nations themselves. So the world building is extra important, otherwise the tension falls flat. And the game does this incredibly well, delivering great cutscenes and characters, while also increasing the immersion with the residents of the cities giving more insight about how the land of Ivalice works. I really love the story in this game because it breaks expectations and delivers great character development. You start the game with Vaughn, but the main character in Final Fantasy XII is actually Ashe, who holds political importance and has to make important decisions about how she will deal with her nation's problems. And the cool thing about Vaughn is that he really makes you feel as an outsider, someone who's there by chance. Lots of RPGs try to sell you on this, but make these characters like super strong or important somehow, but Vaughn is really just a normal person who got caught up in all of this plot. So he's a character more relatable to the player in that sense. Now, you can't talk about Final Fantasy XII without talking about the Gambit system. You know how every RPG has some pretty repetitive parts, and you just get bored out of your mind placing the same commands over and over? Attack, 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 now heal, attack, attack, heal. Urgh. Well, in FF12 we have the Gambit system, which allows you to program your characters to perform actions in various scenarios. It's a very simple yet powerful system that saves up a lot of the player's time, avoiding inputting every single little command. It's useful in grinding, exploring large areas, revisiting areas, you name it. The game starts you off with 2 gambits allowed per character, so you won't be pressured to use it a lot and you can get comfortable testing commands. You unlock more as you develop each character to a maximum of 12 gambits. Get it? It's 12 because it's Final Fantasy XII. And once again, if you absolutely love to issue every single little command and are interested in this feature because you want to play like attack that enemy now you should cast black magic, etc., well, you can always turn the gambits off. It's completely optional. The Gambit system has a lot of rules players will pick up as they play the game and tinker with the gambits, which shows how much dedication the developers put in it to make it as fun as possible. For example, if you set your character to cast Dispel magic on any enemy, they won't cast it infinitely. They'll only cast it if your enemy has some kind of buff, which is when you want to use Dispel magic, right? At the same time, developers made sure that the steal ability did not follow this rule set. They wanted steal to be something players had to attempt multiple times getting it to make sure some items felt hard to get and not giving it for free to players. So a gambit telling you to use steal on any enemy will make characters keep using that ability forever, which isn't really useful in most cases. So you can see how developers wanted the Gambit system to be as fun and helpful as possible. I love that they powered up the system in the remaster in very subtle ways. Now you're allowed to have 3 sets of gambits, so you can prepare yourself for different scenarios and quickly switch it around. In the vanilla version, every time the situation changed, you have to reorganize your gambits, their priority, etc. But now with 3 sets, you can be prepared for a variety of situations and much more quickly. You can also control guest party members' gambits now too. They were previously party members that acted with their own AI and you had no control over them, which could be frustrating in lots of moments. Allowing us to personalize their gambits made them much more useful and fun to have around. Another very smart change that was done in Zodiac Age was the treasure chests. In the vanilla version, chests had very little use to the player, consisting mostly of normal items like potions and very little gil, which is the currency of Ivalice. Good chests were incredibly rare, so most players didn't even bother with them. Zodiac Age adds lots of different chests, and as you explore dungeons they can contain very good equipment that will probably be as good as can be at that point of the game. Chests now also contain spells and techniques that had no other access otherwise. Abilities always had to be bought in the base game, but having to find them by actually exploring dungeons in Zodiac Age makes it much more interesting, and are also a great incentive to thoroughly explore dungeons. Final Fantasy XII, even back in its vanilla version, is one of the games with the highest amount of content I've ever seen. There's so many side quests you can do, a lot of them being available during the main story, and still a huge amount of content in the post-game. Of course, Zodiac Age wouldn't be any different, and it actually makes it a lot more fun with a speed up feature like I've mentioned before. The world of Ivalice is incredibly vast, with lots of different unique locations that are a joy to explore. The active battle system makes exploration smoother while not betraying the strategy elements from Final Fantasy with commands and weight gauge. Towns too are a joy to explore, with NPCs offering lots of different dialogue giving insight on various details about the world, increasing the immersion. NPCs will also change their dialogue depending on their moment of the story, offering thorough players more content to search and enjoy. Probably one of my favorite side quests in all RPGs I've ever played, if not my favorite, is the Hunt side quest in Final Fantasy XII. Various people in the world of Ivalice have need to have a creature slain either because of personal reasons or they care about public safety, etc. The hunts require you to meet people before and after killing the monster, which makes the request seem more real and it makes you feel like you're making a difference to these people's lives. The hunts themselves are very challenging as well, giving enemies that can be hard to find or to beat, or both. Depending on your gear, they can be tougher than the story bosses and some of them are the hardest enemies in the game. The challenges are satisfying in difficulty and you choose the moment you tackle them. You could go under gear for an increased challenge or you can wait until you have better equipment and stats to settle the score. And this approach to gameplay is something that Final Fantasy XII does incredibly well, mind you. You can use all sorts of different ways to beat enemies with head-on attacks, or maybe you prefer magic. Maybe you prefer to weaken your enemies with a technique or a debuff, it's up to you. So knowing the ins and outs of the game has a lot of payoff, which is why I've played the original so many times now. Final Fantasy XII has many dungeons not required to be beaten in the story, also with hidden areas and rare enemies that require specific conditions to appear, which gives a lot of depth to the exploration and side content of the game. This is something I never realized until I played the remaster, but you really have so many things to do outside the story, it's crazy. And in this aspect, the speed up feature works wonders with, and it makes getting all the trophies in this game incredibly fun. The only achievement in the main game that isn't fun at all to get is the one for concurrences. Concurrences are triggered when you use special attacks in a certain amount, and this happens in a minigame sort of mechanic. Yeah, minigame, you can feel that it's going to be bad. The problem is that this minigame is purely luck. I remember this was frustrating in the vanilla version and it's still a problem in Zodiac Age to the frustration of many. The game allows you to try to get these concurrences quite easily since you can perform them after touching a save crystal, but still it's just luck. You get them after you try enough, also by getting some pointers on the internet, but it'll be frustrating as hell until then. Outside the main game, Zodiac Age introduces a trial mode, which is a series of 100 battles to be completed in a row. I was very excited about this addition, but to be honest, I didn't like it very much. If you go for trial mode after you're done with the main game, most battles will be pretty easy, so the first 80 rounds will be a given and will just take a lot of time. In the last 20 or so, you have to face strong enemies all in a row, but even then, some can be pretty easy. Most of these hard encounters will be solved with the same strategies, and you'll probably just reuse what you did in the main game because a good amount of enemies were already battled there. The fun part about trial mode is the new enemies that were added with both friendly faces and foes you never had the opportunity to face in the main mode. These were pleasant surprises, and they could catch you off guard gameplay wise since you don't know what they could pull off. And this is what made the Battle 100 the exception of Trial Mode. This battle has 5 bosses, completely new enemies, and nothing you used before would help you much against them, rendering the most common strategies useless. It was the hardest battle in the game by far, and beating it was incredibly satisfying. I will complain, however, that this battle is a huge contrast to what Final Fantasy XII is all about, the freedom to tackle battles in different ways. This battle has one strategy that works, and you have to follow it to win. You even have to kill the bosses in a certain order, so Trial Mode ended up being the weakest part of the game for me. Lastly, the visual improvements in this game are incredible. The locations of Final Fantasy XII are gorgeous, and the jump to HD makes a major difference by giving them a lot more color without hurting the game's original style. In fact, it only works in favor of the game's art style, with vibrant colors of the background and enemies really reaching the heights they were meant to be in. And something I thought was impressive was the character model improvements. It may seem small, but I remember the characters looked awful on the field due to the PlayStation 2's limitations. Now you get to walk around the world with the characters actually looking how they look on the cutscenes, which is pretty impressive and satisfying. I'm very grateful that this game got an amazing remaster, and I had a lot of fun with Zodiac Age. It's one of my favorite RPGs, and if you like the genre, you should definitely play this game. Especially now that it's so accessible, being on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch, and even on PC. This game deserves more attention, and I hope every RPG lover out there plays it. Thank you very much for watching this. I've been enjoying doing these reviews, I really love these games, and it's fun putting it into words. If you liked it, consider giving the video a like and subscribing, you know the drill. Also, tell me what you thought about it in the comments, I really appreciate any feedback. That was it, and see you folks around. Falou e até mais.